Hi, I'm Murphia, a third-year psychology student here at Montfort University, and I'm going to be sat down with our Interim Vice-Chancellor, Andy Collop, to address any queries about the current UCU industrial action taking place here at Montfort. Thank you for sitting down with me to answer these questions about the UCU strikes, and firstly, I just want to know, why are they happening?
Well, thank you very much for asking me to come along, very much appreciate it. At DMU, UCU members are striking over pay and conditions. There is a separate national dispute over the University Pension Scheme, USS, but most academic staff at DMU aren't in the USS, so DMU is not striking over that. DMU is taking action over pay and conditions. Now,
I already know that there's a gap in race with the pays and also with gender. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, so we've actually done quite a lot of work around our gender pay gap and our race pay gap, and I brought some figures along with me because I didn't want to get them wrong.
Yeah.
So in 2018, our mean gender pay gap was just under 12%, 11.9%, and that was compared to a sector average of just over 15%, so we're doing better than the sector. Yeah. And our median gender pay gap was only 2.6% compared to a sector average of 14.8%. So in terms of gender pay gaps, we're doing quite well. Now, of course, we can't be complacent because any pay gap is unacceptable, so we need to work to bring those down further. We're just about to publish our 2019 figures, and 11.9% will have gone down to 11.2%, and 2.6% will have gone down to 2.2%. So we're moving in the right direction, but there's still work to go. In terms of the race pay gap, our mean race pay gap is 7.5%, and our median race pay gap is actually 0%. Now, we're one of the few universities that actually publishes our race pay gap, so it's a bit difficult to find a comparison. Yeah. But what I can tell you is that next year, data we're just about to publish, our median race pay gap will remain at 0%, and our mean race pay gap will go down from 7.5 to 6.5%. So again, we're moving in the right direction, but there's still a way to go.
Yeah, okay. As a student, and I know a lot of students have the same sort of mindset of why can't lecturers just be paid more?
So it's as often with these things, it's not a straightforward situation. So we as a university, along with 146 other universities in the UK, are part of something called national pay bargaining. That's where a body, it's called UCEA, which is the University and Colleges Association, bargains on behalf of universities, and it negotiates with the unions over pay. Nationally. Yeah. So we're part of a national pay bargaining system.
Okay.
Now, having said that, I think there is some room for manoeuvre, and I think that UCEA quite possibly should increase their offer, and we've written to UCEA and said that to UCEA. So actually we'd be quite supportive of UCEA coming back with an increased offer, but it's not something we can do on our own. It's something that has to come through national pay bargaining. And I should say that national pay bargaining, I think, is very much in our interest as a university, and it's also very much in the union's interest as well, that we remain part of that national pay bargaining system.
Here, it's not DMU, it's just there's a grand scheme of things.
Yeah, we as I say, we feel there's room for manoeuvre there, and we've written to UCEA and suggested that they might want to consider increasing their offer. We would support that.
Now, I want to move on specifically to the strikes and how that's affecting us as students. So, do you know how many lecturers will be striking?
Yeah, so again, I brought the figures with me. So 231 UCU members voted to take strike action. Now, it's important we put that in context. We have about 1,000 academic staff, so that's about between 20 and 25% of our permanent academic staff. Yeah. We have about another 800 part-time hourly paid staff. So only about 20 to 25% of our academic staff voted to go on strike and take action short of a strike. Now, we've had the first two strike days. They were Thursday and Friday last week. Yeah. And as you would expect, we've been monitoring who's on strike and who's not on strike. And between 100 and 130, we think, staff per day went on strike. So that's about between 10 and 15% of the academic staff workforce were on strike for the first 2 days.
So it's not as much as students we expected?
No, so the vast majority of staff, 85% of staff, weren't on strike.
Okay, I see. Now, you said action short of strike. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so action short of a strike, the unions have initiated that, and basically what that means is they'll be working to their contracts. So they won't be doing things that are outside of their contract. So a good example of that is things like open days. Open days happen on a Saturday, so they won't be participating in open days, which obviously are really important events for the university. So action short of a strike also will include things like not rescheduling lectures that they've cancelled, not covering for colleagues. So it's really working to contract. But I think one of the most important things for me is at the moment, action short of a strike doesn't include not marking and assessing student work, because it's really important that carries on, obviously, because we want students to be as minimally affected by this as we possibly can.
So if my lecturers have gone on strike and I've sent in an assignment and then they're taking 20 days to mark it, if they're going on strike during these 20 days, then would there be a delay in me getting it back, and therefore would there be a delay in graduating? Because say my dissertation doesn't get marked on time, I can't graduate without that being marked.
Yeah. So if a lecturer is taking strike action during the period where they're perhaps marking an assessment, then there would be some allowance for that made at the end. So we will do everything we possibly can to make sure that students aren't disadvantaged in any way, because my priority as Interim Vice-Chancellor of this university is to make sure that we look after our students as best we can through this process. So we'll do everything we absolutely can to make sure that students aren't disadvantaged by this action that's going on.
I see. So personally, I don't really do any practical assessments, but for those doing drama or dance, the performing arts, how do they go about doing these assessments if on the day they were meant to do it, their lecturer is on strike?
Yeah. So I know from talking to some students and some staff around the university that there are some issues in places like drama and dance. And in those situations, if students talk to their programme leader or their module leader, or failing that, the Associate Professor for Student Experience in their faculty, then we'll do everything we can to reschedule that, to make sure that it happens at a different time.
But when it comes to exams, obviously there's external exam boards, and we don't really know what happens with exams. So say our lecturers aren't there to do it, do our exams get affected by these strikes?
We use professional invigilators at DMU as well, so exams shouldn't be affected by the strike, and as I said, we'll do everything we possibly can to make sure that wherever possible they're not affected, because, you know, as I said, my priority is to make sure students can graduate as planned in the summer and are able to progress through their programmes as smoothly as possible.
I know a lot of international students have been really worried about the strikes, just because if they're not told that their lecture's been cancelled, or they have been told and then they show up to another one and that's been cancelled, and they get confused about which ones have been cancelled and which haven't, and then they end up missing their lectures, will they be affected, and will their visas, will they be affected?
Yeah. No, we'll take a sensible view on this. So obviously if an international student turns up and a lecture's cancelled, the fact they haven't attended the lecture that's not taking place, they wouldn't obviously be penalised. UCU's position is that they're not encouraging their members to tell us when they're striking, but actually not all UCU members are following that line. Some members and some other staff in the university who are on strike have been telling us when they're not going on strike, and we've obviously been telling students as soon as we have that information, but in some cases we just don't know.
If lecturers aren't being paid for not showing up to their lectures, what happens with that money that they would have had?
That's a really good question. So I think it was a couple of weeks ago, I came along and talked to a group of students in this building upstairs, and one of the students in that forum asked the same question, and actually they said, well, why don't we put the funding that we're not paying to the lecturers because they're on strike, why don't we put that into the Student Hardship Fund, which I think is a fantastic idea. So that's exactly what we're going to do.
Will commuter students be compensated in any sort of way? Say their lecture's been cancelled but they don't find out until they turn up to their lecture and it's not happening anymore.
Yeah, each case will be looked at on a case-by-case basis.
You as a Vice-Chancellor, how do you feel about the lecturers going on strike, and do you support them, and do you wish we could do more, like as a university, as students, lecturers, anyone here, could we do more to be supporting our lecturers?
I think it's a really good question. I think part of my frustration is that a large proportion of the strike action is around pay, and pay is a national issue. As I've said, we're part of a national pay bargaining body, and so we're only one voice in 147. You know, we would be prepared, as I've said, to move in terms of pay, but it requires the group as a whole to be prepared to move. So it's quite frustrating for me, because there are some other issues as well related to conditions. So there are things like workloads, casualisation, and pay gaps, and I've already talked about pay gaps. Casualisation, you know, we don't offer 0 hours contracts, and we're always happy to talk to unions about workloads. I know there are some areas of the university where workloads are quite high, and we need to bring those down. So I think the lesson I've learned from this is that we need to continue the dialogue with the unions and other staff groups to look at issues that are related to local conditions at this university. I'm very confident we can resolve those with the unions and other staff groups. But as I say, it comes back to my frustration being that the pay issue is a national pay bargaining issue, and I think it's in both of our interests, the unions and the universities, to stay in pay bargaining, which means we have limited ability to do things on our own.
Yeah. Now, whilst these strikes were like in conversation and people are finding out, okay, some of our lecturers aren't going to be showing up, things are going to be affected, we don't know what's going to happen as students. One of my lecturers at the end of a lecture said, okay, this is why we're going on strike, and sort of explained it to us. And one of his concerns was the contracts. Now, you say there's no 0-hour contracts, but he told us that the contracts here are like 6 to 12 months, and because of that, lecturers find it quite difficult to apply for things because they don't have that confirmation of, okay, for the next 3 years I have this income. They just have for the next 6 months or 12 months, I know I'm going to be working at DMU, and after that I'm not quite sure.
So the vast majority of our academic staff are on permanent contracts.
Okay.
We do have some academic staff on fixed term contracts, and we do have some part-time hourly paid staff who come in basically to lecture for a set number of hours. So we do have different types of contracts. We've actually been quite proactive in moving part-time hourly paid staff onto permanent contracts where their case warrants it. So we have a unit called Cell, and I think it was last autumn we moved a number of staff from part-time hourly paid contracts from Cell to permanent contracts. So we're always looking at contracts. I think there's another issue around research staff with giving continuous fixed-term contracts. And we've started not doing that. So where somebody has come to the end of a contract and another contract is being offered that's fixed term, we look very carefully at that. And I've certainly just approved a few of those changing to permanent contracts because we shouldn't be stacking up fixed term contracts end on end. So again, there's more we can do. Very happy to talk to unions and other staff groups about that. But I think actually we're making progress in those areas as well.
And lastly, I just want to say thank you again for sitting down and talking to me and helping me understand more about the strikes, and hopefully helping everyone else understand about the strikes.
Thank you very much. It was a real pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you.